Hi, and welcome to the session. My name is Marvin Boss, and I'm on the development team of BAASS Business Solutions. Today I'd like to talk to you about something that most of us have to deal with in Sage 300, and that is maintaining item pricing. Those of you familiar with how item pricing works in Sage know that when you want to update prices, it can be a bit of a tedious affair. Let me remind you. I have here the standard Sage 300 item pricing screen. Now you have to select your item one at a time, and then you need to go to each of the price lists that has that item on it and update the base price in this column over here. As you know, if you have many items and many price lists to update, this can get a little tedious. What we've done here at BAASS is we've designed and developed a utility screen that makes it much simpler and easier for you to update your item pricing in a grid style interface so that it is simple and fast. Here's the item pricing grid screen that we've developed. When you open up the screen, you're met with this blank grid looking interface. You are allowed to enter in a range of items that you want to work with. By default, it starts with blank to ZZZ, as you can see, which is the default for all items. It also asks for which currency you are going to be working with in this session. I'll get more information on how the currency works in the screen in a little while. Here, there's a little plus sign beside the word more. When we hit this button, it opens up a couple more options for item selection. We can enter in a category range, and also we can enter in a last modified from date and to date. This date range is specific to when the item record was last modified, including items that have been added to the system. So if you've mass introduced a number of items into your Sage 300 system in the last week or month or something, this date range could be valuable to you to select those items to put on price lists. I'm going to collapse these selection criteria, and I'm going to hit refresh. When you hit the refresh button, the screen goes into your Sage 300 database, and in this case, I'm using the SAM Ltd or sample company data that comes with every Sage 300 installation. The grid populates, and you can see the records here in front of you. The columns that we have are the item code, the description, the stock unit of measure, the category, and the account set. Those columns are from the item. To the right of the account set, there is one column for each of the price list codes that have been defined in your Sage 300 system. As you can see, Sample Company has price list codes AUSTRA for Australia, Canada, China, CTPR01, Japan, RTL, UK, USA, and WHS. The grid has filled in the records, and you can see that some of the columns are shown in white, and some of the columns are shown gray. There's a difference here. Using the currency code that we've selected up here, in this case CAD, when the grid fills up, it uses the price list records based on the currency which has been selected. So any item which is on a price list using currency code CAD shows up in white. You can change the grid to move columns around and to only have certain columns visible. Because we're working in the Canadian currency, I'm going to take this column here, this Australian column, and I'm going to move it to the side. This WHS column has Canadian pricing on it. So I'm going to move it in this direction to the left so that we can group the columns that we want to work with all in a row. And now you can see, because we can move these columns, that the columns that we want to work with are the leftmost pricing columns. There are more options for choosing which columns you want to see in the grid. This button over here on the left, when we press it, it shows this little window, and in this window is a listing of all of the columns that are in the grid. We can selectively turn these columns on and off. So I'm going to turn off China, Japan, RTL, UK, USA, and Australia. And as you can see, as we were clicking them, they were disappearing from the grid. We'll close that window, and now you can see that the grid does not have those other columns in it anymore. It's interesting to note that when you selectively choose columns and move columns around, that based on your user ID in Sage, those settings will remain the next time you open up this particular screen. And I'll demonstrate that now. I'm going to close the item pricing grid, and I'm going to reopen it. When the screen comes back, you'll notice that the only price code columns that are visible are the ones that we had selected in the previous session. I'm going to hit the refresh button, and now we can see that the grid has populated again. So what is it that we're looking at here? We are looking at all of the items in Sage and also their prices on each of the price lists. So we can see, we'll choose the second item down here, A11050 is $10 on the Canada price list, $7.50 on WHS, and $7.50 on CTPR01. And we can see that by going back to the stock Sage 300 item pricing screen and selecting A1105. And as you can see, currency code CAD, price list code Canada, the base price is $10. CTPR01 has $7.50 and WHS has $7.50. I'm going to bring back the China price list column so we can see what that means here. In Sage, for item A1105, this item does appear on the China price list code, but it does not appear for currency code CAD. This is why it shows up as gray under the China price list column. You can set a price on the China price list column. Let's set that to $12.50 Canadian. And we'll also update a couple of other prices here. For Canada, we'll make this $12.50. Warehouse, or WHS, we'll make that $9.50. And CTPR01, we'll make this also $9.50. So as you can see, you can cursor through the grid, much like an Excel workbook, and you can enter values right on the cells themselves to change the prices. Down here we have a button, Update Sage Pricing. When we press this button, we receive a confirmation message. So we say, yes, we would like to update the Sage pricing, and Sage pricing update is complete. Now let's go into Sage and see what's happened. We'll move off the record and back on in order to refresh that. And here we can see we have A11050 selected. And here we have currency code CAD, price list code Canada, and as you can see, the base price has now updated to $12.50. You'll recall that we entered in a value under the China price list column on the item pricing grid, and we made that $12.50. When we updated Sage pricing, that added a new pricing record for this item to reflect currency code CAD, price list code China, and the amount is $12.50. So that's a very simple way that you can pull all of your items into a grid and in one step update all of your item pricing and then push that pricing update into Sage using this button. And we've seen that we can selectively move columns around and also choose which columns we want to appear on the screen. We can also work with further subsets of items right within the grid using this blue line here at the top. The blue row at the top is a filter row, and it allows you to selectively display only records that you want to work with. As an example, under the category, when we press this drop, this pop-up appears, and if you're familiar with Excel style filtering, it's very similar. This list contains all of the possible values that are in the category column. For now, we're going to choose to work with category C1. And as you can see, when we select C1, the grid changes to show only those items which are column C, category C1. This button to the right of the drop clears the filtering condition for that column. You can also filter by keying in a value. In the description, I'm going to choose items which have the word series in their description. By typing in the word series in the description, you can see that the grid selectively and dynamically changes to include only items which have the word series in their description. Again, I can press this button here to clear those. So I'm going to now select items which use category code A1, and I'm going to show you how we can use Excel itself to update the item pricing. Up here in the menu, we have an export import option, and I'm going to choose export. When we hit that, we receive this confirmation message. Do you want to export to Excel? And we say yes. So as long as you have Microsoft Excel installed on your computer that you're using to work with the item pricing grid, that option will produce this Excel workbook with the items that are currently in the grid in the format of the grid. And I'm going to drag this workbook down so that you can see what I mean. In the item pricing grid, we were working with price list codes Canada, WHS, CTPR01, and China. As you can see, inside of the Excel workbook, those are the only 4 price list columns which are included in the workbook. So now we're going to make some changes. Under the Canada column, I'm going to change the first 4 rows and update the pricing. I'm going to set this one to 65, 15, 75, and 12. Save the workbook and close. Now we can either bring that workbook in directly over top of the grid as we have here, or we could clear the grid and then bring in the workbook. I'm going to bring the workbook in directly over top of the rows that we already have. Under Excel, under Export Import, I choose Import, select the workbook, and the message that the import is complete. Once the import is complete, you can see that the grid has updated the values to show the changes that we made in the Excel workbook. So this reads 65, 15, 75, and 12. We're going to update Sage pricing. And it says the Sage price update is complete. And let's take a look in Sage. So starting from the top, we have A11030. We have 65, 15, 75, and 12. Those updated prices in Sage line up with the changes that were introduced in the grid. So that's been a quick look at a utility that we've put together to help you quickly and easily update Sage item pricing from one screen in one step. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.